Hey folks, this is Jove bringing in a summary/review for The Mandalorian Episode 4, which they titled Sanctuary. And as we'll see from the episode, we'll see why. Things open to a farming village, and they're harvesting brightly colored fish, which appears to not only be a food source, but apparently a dye they use on their clothing, because they're all sporting the same color scheme of dark but glowy teal amongst their gray. We can also see them using droids to help gather the harvest, which at first is a little surprising to me, since this is supposed to be some tucked away village on a nowhere planet, but I suppose that would be like being surprised to see a pickup truck being used by poor Vietnamese rice farmers, parked by the paddies. Disney really seemed to lean towards multicultural casting for this village, because you can literally pick out every race of the rainbow mixed into this and later scenes of the farming community. It pulled me a little out of the immersion, since normally when you see rural areas and villages in the world, which are cut off from most other people or traffic and travel passing through it, they tend to be a very single in its people, like Eskimos or tribes in Africa or South America, island nations, even if it's a village made up of maybe, refugees from other villages on the planet, or maybe different races from other ones, they all kind of gathered in one spot. After several generations, the pot would be a little more melted, but, whatever, it's Disney, they want to cover their bases, even if it doesn't always make sense, but, it didn't bug me that much. They're villagers, it serves the purpose, whatever. This, peaceful scene is quickly turned on its head with the arrival of blaster fire from a high angle and dog-faced marauders who invade the village and steal whatever they can get their paws on. If this is some known Star Wars race from the novels or games, I'm not aware of who they are. So if anyone wants to comment and educate me on this, feel free to leave a comment below, let me know. This begins the Mandalorian's kind of dip back into classic Western tropes. In this case, the defenseless town or village being attacked by outside forces. Usually banditos or hired guns under the orders of some wealthy land grabber. In this case, they seem to be more of the marauder type. And now when we cut back to our hero back in his ship, he's having a funny little exchange with the Baby Yoda creature, and he starts talking to himself, and it feels like he says more in this little 20-second scene than he had in the entire first 3 episodes. This isn't the case, of course, but, he unloads so much dialogue, it feels that way. I've got mixed feelings about this, since one of the appeals he has was being like the strong but mostly silent protagonist, but I know that could also limit things a bit, but thankfully he's still a speak when necessary type as the episode progresses. Since we were shown that Baby Yoda, yeah, I keep saying Baby Yoda, and I know it's not actually Yoda as a baby, but I don't know what else to call him, and the baby just doesn't feel right, so I'm just going to call him Baby Yoda until this kid gets a name. Alright, so since we were shown that the Baby Yoda's little floating carriage thing was trashed in the last episode, I'm assuming he'd either be staying put, getting carried around, or that he's going to find a replacement. But when Mando tries to leave without him, Baby Yoda graduates from baby to toddler, and is apparently cool just walking around. Was anyone else surprised by this? I was assuming that Mando was going to find a replacement for the carriage as he lone wolf and cub this kid around, but nope, he is walking with tiny little short-legged steps, which Mando must be practically shuffling his feet to slow to his pace so he can keep up. They enter the nearby traveling hub town outside the village, like way outside the village, the one that we saw from the start of the episode, and he pops into the local tavern, which as a bounty hunter I'm sure is just a natural at this point to get a feel for the place, and they run across this creature which is essentially a cat with alien appendages and a few tweaks to its face. It must be a pet because it doesn't seem like an animal that would be natural in the forest with the coloring and the markings, but it feels a little lazy that they essentially just tweaked the features of a cat instead of some original creature, like, they normally do with Star Wars, but, whatever. Also, once again, if this is some known animal in the expanded universe and they're trying to pay tribute to it, feel free to call me a dumbass in the comments, but if it is, they're being lazy then too. So, this is when we get our first look at Gina Carano as Cara Dune, and I'm really digging her look. The first instinct is to be a little nitpicky about why someone who's trying to hide and blend in on this planet is still wearing what appears to be a kind of a military-style armor, but if not her former old trooper armor. But, when you're paranoid about jerks showing up with bounty fobs, I'll hold my tongue and say they're likely, I'd be wearing a little bit of armor just in case too. This next bit threatened to ruin my enjoyment of this entire episode. Alright, this actress that they brought in to play the tavern keeper or server or whatever her role is supposed to be here was so out of place and over the top in her acting, it feels like she was cast as like a favor to someone. She hams it up like some character on SNL, like Saturday Night Live, and my god was it off-putting. I looked it up later and I found her name was Ida Darvish, and she's married to actor Josh Gad. So I'm guessing someone owned Josh for a very big favor he earned when he wasn't voice acting an annoying living snowman in Frozen, because her performance was just as annoying as Olaf, if not more. My god. So this leads to the Mandalorian trying to track her down after a disappearing act, and her getting the drop on him. Again, this is a bit of a mixed bag, because I'm glad they avoided the hack-writing cliche scene of her completely owning the protagonist to showcase that being a woman doesn't mean she can't be strong and she's a total badass. In this case, it's somewhat back and forth of, again, very Wild West show punches being thrown, and our girl Gina is a former MMA fighter, and it looks like she can believably lay out a dude, so it doesn't demand the usual suspension of disbelief to kick in whenever a 90-pound actress starts taking out thugs in movies and shows. Our hero, once again is very ineffective with his flamethrower, shooting it off at random when it's not even pointed at the target yet, but you know what? We get more flamethrower action, so I'm happy. I'm just rolling with it. It just seems that he's just not comfortable with how to use it yet, but maybe that's just his character, I don't know. It ends in a stalemate, and he throws in a little joke, and then we cut to a joke of Baby Yoda watching the fight, and personally, I'll put up with maybe 1 or 2 of these kinds of cheesy jokes per episode, if it absolutely must be done. Even though I don't think it should be that kind of show. The dark humor of the previous episode's self-destruct sequence bounty droid was about the level of silliness we should really be shooting for, but honestly, anything short of the joke every 2 minutes pace of the recent films is a godsend. Cut to the tavern, where we get a little bit of Cara's backstory. Nothing too deep, just enough to know what she's all about, and she isn't about to be starting anything with the Mandalorian, as long as he stays out of her business. Like Mando, she's not really the lawful good type, but she isn't a complete scumbag, so her character is in a category Westerns have labeled like a lighter shade of black, based off the whole white hat, black hat character types in those stories. She gives the impression she doesn't really dig the idea of hiding out with another outsider showing up, because it may draw attention to her own situation. I initially couldn't tell if Mando was joking around about needing to move on because his planet's taken, but he's shown prepping to leave. I assume he wants to start as little trouble as possible, even if he would normally maybe have something to say about that. Sort of bugged me, but it made more sense after a little thought into this possible mindset. I mean, he could have just flown to the other side of the planet, I guess, but whatever. Maybe this is the only major hub or town on this entire planet, and he's not about to go camping. Now, when a couple of the opening scene's villagers who were traveling to seek help run into our hero prepping a ship, I couldn't tell who they were supposed to be until their blue tie-dye clothes got into the light. One of these guys apparently has access to books that go into detail about Mandalorians and their culture. They're fish farmers, and this guy traded some day-glow guppies for an encyclopedia at some point on bounty hunters. Thankfully, he's staying in character, and the Mandalorian is blowing them off. Just because he's rescuing kids getting experimented on, we can't really have him go full Heart of Gold yet, because that would just, make him less interesting as a character, to say the least. Mando takes the opportunity to use the village for hiding purposes, and he hires Cara to help, giving her character a reasonable excuse to throw in with helping a bunch of random multicultural farmers in need. As our hero settles in, we hit on 2 more classic Western tropes as we see the opening scene's mother and daughter here. The first of which being the beautiful widow, who in classic Western movies is usually a woman trying to run a farm by herself after the husband is murdered, or is a representative of a small village, which is the case in this episode. The second trope has already been somewhat introduced earlier. There are several Westerns where the hero is partially raised by a Native American tribe when orphaned, usually to give an excuse or reason why he's like especially skilled in survival or tracking. But in this case, he went all in, adapting full Mandalorian culture as his own. Speaking of which, she's showing a bit of interest in Mando, including questioning his habit of never taking off his helmet in front of others, which is, you know, full Mandalorian culture. She's rolling the dice a bit on this one, with her hint of flirtation, because, you know, for all she knows, he's a werewolf under there. This is roughly where her daughter asks to feed the Yoda baby in a way you'd probably ask if you could hand feed someone's dog. When's the last time you met someone with a cute kid and you asked, "Can I feed him?" So after this, Mando and Cara go on reconnaissance and collectively drop their jaws when they realize that they're up against an AT-ST, which honestly I'm glad is getting a bit of respect since it's essentially a walking tank, despite being treated as a bit of a joke in a lot of the previous movies after getting owned by Ewoks and easy mini-bosses in the video games early on. They warn the villagers who complain about being told to leave because of their village being around for, you know, generations. Despite the lack of mixed-race kids or the universal world baby this village would eventually produce. So this leads to the next Western trope, teaching the town to learn to defend itself. Alongside the protagonists in the big fight. You know, teaching them to shoot was one thing, but suggesting that a forest village who fish doesn't have a single individual who knows how to thrust a wooden spear seems kind of silly. Also, I wouldn't have minded a little more backstory on Sexy Widow to explain why she was able to handle a rifle so expertly, but, you know, I'll just chalk that up to Kathleen Kennedy standards set in place and move on. You know what I mean. Mando and Cara go on recon again and a little bit of demo, this time to check out the Marauders' camp directly to see if they can handle this Solid Snake style, and from what I can tell, it seems the bandits are stealing the villagers' fish to bootleg some kind of alcoholic beverage. I know it's fish-based, but I kind of sort of want to try it. I mean, it's glowing, so you never know. Things go south, and despite blowing up the camp, the AT-ST activates, complete with car interior LED lighting to give it that glowing red eyes effect. It and the remaining bandits follow them back to the village, where they set up a trap, and again it shows that the villagers aren't exactly owning these guys after their day's worth of training, and even the heroes are pinned down until the AT-ST is finally lured into the trap they set and finished off what I assumed is a thermal detonator type grenade. Again, you Star Wars superfans likely know exactly what kind of grenade it is. If someone links me to exactly what kind it is and it's not a thermal detonator type of grenade, I'll give you shout out in my next review video for this series. So, after the day is won, Mando decides this is a good place to leave the Yoda baby, but not so fast. Bounty hunters are still after it, and after a save from Cara, he realizes he needs to keep moving on with the kid in tow. Cara decides to go on her own way as well, and I know a lot of people were expecting her to maybe join his crew, maybe get on the ship, but I like the idea of her being a wild card out there for them to maybe run across again. She's a believable character, and outside of needing to be a little more fleshed out, I like her as an addition to the story. I'll be honest, this episode wasn't as good as the first three in my opinion, but I can't really complain about it overall, and it was still a fun watch. It dipped a bit too predictably into the Western tropes to the point of being predictable, and that's really the only honest complaint I had. The introduction of any new characters in a Disney-owned Star Wars story has been less than amazing in the film, so I'm glad Cara turned out to be someone we could actually care about. Well, that's it for episode 4 of The Mandalorian. I'm sure there's a bunch I didn't discuss, bring up, or notice, so please feel free to leave a comment. Maybe something you don't 100% agree with me on. I'd love to hear thoughts on this episode. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell next to it. And if you're feeling extra charitable, hit that like button as well. I'd really appreciate it. It helps the channel. And I will see you guys next time.